Welcome to a new video on YouTube channel of tutorialspedia.com. In this video, we are going to cover MuleSoft Validation Module, which is quite popular and widely used module available in MuleSoft when implementing your projects in AnyPoint Studio. We will see that how we can use this module to validate data or validate Mule messages using different operations which are provided as part of this module. Let's look at the details of the topics that are going to be covered in this video. First of all, we will have high-level overview of validation module, what exactly it is and why it is used. And then in the demonstration, we will be covering some of the available operations. For example, we will cover is email operation and see that how we can validate email addresses using this operation. Then I will demonstrate how we can use is IP operation from this validation module to validate the IP addresses. And then we will see how we can use is URL module and using this is URL module operation, and using this operation how we can validate the URLs for our Mule messages. And last but not least, we will see that how we can use Matches Regex operation, which we can use to use any regular expressions, and based on the regular expression we can perform the validation. So availability of this regular expression based validation opens the doors for any types of validation that you want to perform. As you know that using regular expressions we can perform plenty of basic to complex level of validations, and we will see how we can use this. These are just a handful of operations which we will be covering in this demonstration to keep this video less lengthy. But of course, you can always explore and try all of the operations that are part of this validation module. Alright, so before we proceed with the demonstration, let me just briefly explain what validation module is. So validation module is a module provided by MuleSoft, which is not by default available in your project once you create a fresh project in AnyPoint Studio, but using add modules option, you can add it. So if you click on add modules, you can see that we have this validation module. So just drag and drop it, and then this module will be added into your project. And this module provides you plenty of operations which you can use to perform different types of validation operations for your messages, for your Mule messages or the data. For example, if you see here, it has a big number of operations which are supported or which are available, and using these operations you can perform your data validations. So this module comes quite handy whenever you have to perform your validations for the data before it reaches to the backend or before it reaches to any other applications in case of complex integrations. And you can filter out the data using these operations, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel or write this complex code yourself to do the validation. Rather, you can simply use this validation operations and perform the required validation. As an example, let's suppose that there is some login related API that you are implementing. So there you can simply validate the email address using the is email operation. Also, if you have some other scenario where you are checking for some of the IP addresses, if they are valid or not, or some URLs, or even if you want to see some of the data, if it's null or not null, you can use these operations. And other than that, you can see that matches regular expression. This one provides you plenty of it provides you a lot of flexibility to cover any type of validations using the regular expressions. And then you can see that it has operation for is not blacklisted IP, is not blank string, and so on and so forth. A lot of operations are there. And let's now proceed with the demonstration for some of these operations. Okay, so from the HTTP module, I'm going to just add a listener to the message flow. And using this listener, what we will do is that we will configure the connector, HTTP connector configuration, and then the request will be coming in the form of a HTTP request. And the data that we will be validating will be coming in the form of the query parameters. So let's click on this plus button, and by default, we have localhost and the port is 8081. So let's use the same. In case in your machine port 8081 is already in use, you can always configure it to some different port. And then in the path, let's put something like slash validate. Okay, so after this, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add set variable. So using set variable, what we will do is that we will just store the value from the query parameter into a variable over here. So let's name it as data, and the value is going to be, I will use the function attributes dot query params dot value. So this value is going to be the key for the query that is going to be passed from the browser or from any of the client, and then whatever value will be assigned to it will be stored into the data. So data is the name of our variable. Alright, so after this, now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to try the first operation for our use case, which is IP. So I want to validate that is it the IP that is passed in the query parameter is a valid IP or not. So as soon as I drag is IP, you can see that under the general configurations, I have to do some of the settings. So in the basic settings, I will have to choose module configuration and I'll click on the plus button. Here, I'm not going to do anything fancy, nothing in detail, and I'll just click on OK because we want to keep it as simple as possible. And then here, what's the IP that we want to validate? So the IP will be in the variable. So I will use vars dot data. So this data variable will be containing the IP that will be coming as part of query parameters. And here in the error exception, you can write your custom message. So what happens is that whenever some validation fails, the error of validation type, some of its subtypes like validation dot not valid IP, not valid email, or something like that, is this type of exception is raised. But you can always write some custom message here. So in this case, I'm going to write that this is not a valid IP address. So this is the custom message that I want to use for this case. Okay, so now what I want to do is that I just want to use a transform message. So in the happy scenario, I want to return a JSON. So I will use this transform message and I will change it to JSON, and here I will write message, and the message will be valid. So this is a simple message that will be returned in case of valid request. So if the IP is valid, this is the response that is going to be returned. Now I'm going to run this project in the embedded runtime, and then we will hit this service on port 8081, and we will pass a query parameter in which we will pass the IP and we will validate it. So let me run it. So it will take a little time. So in the meanwhile, I will pause the video. So once it is loaded into the runtime, we will hit the service. So we can see that the project has been deployed and the status can be seen here in the console. And now we can try to hit the service. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to open the browser and I will hit it localhost colon 8081 slash validate question mark value. So the value is going to be some IP. Let me put something wrong. So I want to see that if I put something invalid, which is not the actual IP, what will happen? So now if I hit the service, you can see that we got the response that this is not a valid IP. Let me zoom it so that you can see it proper. So we got the response that this is not a valid IP. And if we go to the console, we can see this that we an error or an exception has been raised and the error type is validation colon invalid IP, and then it has other details about this particular exception. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to hit it with a correct or a valid IP. So I will put something 192.168.1.1, and you can see that we got a response that it is a valid IP. So this is how we just validated an IP address using this operation which is available in the validation module. Now let's do something else and explore other operations. So if we see we have another operation is URL, let me stop it. Okay, so I'm going to just remove this is IP, and I'm going to add is URL. So here we are going to validate the URL. So for the module configuration, we will select the same, and in the general input, we will use vars dot data, and then in the message we are going to send some custom error message. This is not a valid URL. So this will be the message that will be returned in this case in case of an error. Again, I will load this. You can keep the project running in case of this type of changes as hot deployments occur, and you can test it again. But since I already stopped it, so I will run it again. So the deployment is done again. Let's go back to the client. And if I try the same value which I previously sent, which is actually an IP, which is just an IP and not a URL, I should get an error. And you can see that we got an error that this is not a valid URL. Now I'm going to try with some URL. I will write http://tutorialspedia.com, and we can see that we got a message that is valid. So if I just remove .com, you can see that it is still returning valid. So the way this is valid URL is implemented is something different. So you can argue that without .com it should not be valid, but it's still saying it's valid. So if I remove HTTP, then it says invalid. Anyways, you can try something else as well, like if we try https google.com.pk, it says valid. So if I put something dot, again it says it's valid. So I don't think so that it's a very good type of validation for the URLs. It should have some improvements, and there is a room for improvement. It should consider if there is no .com or dot something, it should raise an error, but it's not raising the error. Anyways, this is how you can use this, and once we will proceed in this demo, I will show you that we can always use regular expressions as well. So if you want a more tighter or a more complex or a more customized type of regular expression based validation, instead of using this out of the box function, we can use regular expressions as well. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to try another function, which is email. So this is email function checks whether required the message or the data is a valid email or not. So in the general email, I'm going to put vars dot data, because that's where the data will be saved. In the message, again, I'm going to write some custom message, which will be this is not a valid email address. So now we will be validating email addresses. So let's save it so a hot deployment should occur, and then we should be able to test this one. Let me go back to the client, and right now if I keep it as is, I should get a message that this is not a valid email address. Now if I replace it and write something like admin at tutorialspedia.com, it says valid. So if I put it without .com, it says invalid. So I think email validation in this validation module is quite implemented quite better compared to the URL validation. That's my personal observation. You can disagree or you can agree. Okay, so now if we go back, we can see that there are a lot of other operations also available, but to keep this video not that lengthy, I don't want to cover all of them. So we are going to just check match regular expression. So this is an important one that we are going to see. So we will choose this matches regular expression, and here we will have to write the regular expression that, and here we will have to write the data that we want to validate, which is inside our variable vars.data, and then here we have to write the regular expressions. So I'm hopeful that you know the basic syntax of writing the regular expressions. If you are not much familiar with the regular expression, over the internet you can find plenty of resources available to understand how to write regular expression for the basic as well as complex validation. But for this scenario, I'm going to just use a simple regular expression. Let me copy it, which I already wrote, and I'll explain you what I'm going to validate. So backslash G5. This means I want that the request that comes in should have 5 numbers. D means digit, and then it should have a dash, and then it should have another 4 numbers. So that means that if I try, for example, if I try, okay, it's 5 and 4. So if you try 1 2 3 4 5 dash 1 2 3 4, it means it has 5 digits first, and then a dash, and then 4 digits. So it should be a valid one. So first we will try this, and the way you can use it, maybe you want to validate some of the zip codes. As you know, in some countries or in some states there is some specific format of the zip codes. Also phone numbers might, or mobile numbers might have some specific format. So if you have to validate something like that, you can always use the regular expressions. And that's not the only case. You can have plenty of other use cases where you can use regular expressions to do the validation. And here I'm going to it has an option, you want case sensitive or insensitive. So we will, since we are doing with the numbers, so it doesn't matter, but you can always do like. And here we will write some message in case of an invalid input. We will say that the data should contain 4 digits followed by a hyphen or a dash, and then another 4 digits. This is just a message. You can always write something like it's an invalid zip code, it's an invalid number, invalid data format, or whatever you want based on your requirements. So I'm just going to save it. So again, hot deployment should occur, and once it's running into the embedded runtime, we should try this. Okay, so by default, if I try again, I get the error. The data is invalid. Data should contain 4 digits followed by a hyphen and then another 4 digits. So what I'm going to do is that in the value, I'm going to write this 1 2 3 4 5 dash 1 2 3 4. And now you can see that the message is that it's a valid input. If I try something like, if I try to add another number, so now before dash and after dash, both sides we have 5 5, so it says it's invalid, because the same format should be that we should have 4 numbers, then hyphen, and sorry, 5 numbers, then hyphen, and then 4 numbers in total, not 5. So this is how you can perform the validations using the regular expressions. This is just an example regular expression. Of course, you can have plenty of other options to do the validation with the regular expressions. All right, so that's it from this simple video. I hope that the topics that we covered and the contents that we covered in this tutorial will be helpful for you. If you have any questions, you can always write in the comment section. And if you have any idea of some other topics that you want me to cover, just write in the comment section. I'll try my best to cover those. And for more information, to read further, you can always refer to the official documentation from the MuleSoft. And you can also refer to the playlist on my this tutorialspedia.com YouTube channel, where I have many videos covering different topics, not only related to MuleSoft, but also about other integration related technologies. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as more content like this will be uploaded in the future. Thank you very much.